There she goes. David McKenzie, Spearmint Goldfish. A little late, my friend. Oh, sorry, that's not professional.
Captain's log, stardate 10/09/46.44. The After Files live stream has proven itself once again to be extremely unprofessional.
Are you putting super chats up?
No. No?
All right, not much to set up here because he gets into all of it. He's not really a whistleblower because he's on 4chan, but he's former military contractor, part of the team that goes and recovers crashed UFOs. He's part of the team that comes in after they check for bodies and all of that. So he'll get into it at some point and talk about how he's heard that there are bodies, but I don't think he's ever seen any. So what we're looking at up here, if I can get to it, yeah, there we go, is someone took all of his, the 4chan thread was 1 million miles long. So someone took just all of his answers. So it's kind of condensed. I have intimate knowledge of what the U.S. currently knows about UFOs minus the last 2 years. So he's been out. So he's from 2 years. He's been out of the scene for 2 years. He says, UFOs are primarily unmanned drones. UFOs are built to spec each time they are deployed. UFOs are created by a mobile construction facility that hides in the ocean. Construction facility destroys anything that comes close to it and will disappear for days when approached aggressively. U.S. believes the facility has been active on Earth for at least 100 years or much longer. So that's how he starts it off. Hey, Steve N. He loves the channel. Good to see you there, my friend. Elliot Hurst, Bermuda Triangle Hamburger Factory. Correct. That's what this is. That's exactly what this is. Dobby Debup, disappear. Yeah, so this, he'll get into it later, but the location of this platform is Bermuda Triangle area. And that's why planes and ships and everything disappear from there because they get too close to this platform. And Elliot's calling it a hamburger factory because he describes it as shaped like a big hamburger, you know, it's a big flying saucer. So primarily unmanned drones. So he talks about, and I'll get to it. It's a lot. So I'm going to try and give you the nuggets that I know as we get through them. And I'll just repeat myself later. Primarily unmanned drones. So he talks about how there used to be more piloted craft. But as our technology advanced, they were having more ships go down, you know, more UFOs go down, probably around 1947 would be my guess. So they just started doing more unmanned drones. But he said there are some piloted craft from time to time. When he says built to spec, what he means is the administrators of the factory, the hamburger factory, will say, all right, we're gonna scan the North Pole, for example. So using their technology, their AI, whatever it is, we're gonna scan the North Pole, ice core sample, whatever it is. And then the platform will create the machine to order with the right scanning equipment, the right propulsion for the mission, and it will put together a package. And then it will seal up the package. And then it gets deployed from under the ocean. It goes on its mission, does whatever it's doing, scans for a day, a week, an hour, comes back under the ocean into the platform and gets disassembled. The data is offloaded or it's whatever streamed while it's on mission. But the drones are destroyed. You know, he's not exactly sure what happens. He thinks that they're broken down to component parts and metal is smelted or resmelted to be reused. And the reason why the craft that we see have these different shapes is because they have different equipment packages, different scientific scanners. So a lot of them are going to fit in a cigar shape, but you have some that are bigger, some smaller. So that's what he means by to spec. Fire away on questions. I'll answer what I can. You won't be disappointed. I don't know what the question is here. It doesn't officially exist. It doesn't officially exist. I won't use the internal name on here either. So someone had asked him, who does he work for? Like what department, what company? And he says it doesn't officially exist, but it has an internal designation, but he's not going to tell us what that is, obviously. People ask him, is it Oumuamua? If you don't remember, Oumuamua was that long cigar-shaped object that flew into our solar system and kind of defied physics and then flew out again. Maybe I'll do an episode on that or make it part of an episode because Oumuamua is an interesting object that has interesting attributes, but I don't know if it's enough for a full episode. Jenny, you're down there. We have on our list the R1 object that's out in the Kuiper Belt. I think Oumuamua might be good to tack onto that. And maybe the episode is objects in our solar system that science can't explain. Could be cool. That actually sounds like a winner. That sounds like a 44,000 premiere to me. So, but he says no, Oumuamua was not one of theirs. Is there a working theory on the origins? If so, care to elaborate? So quite a bit. We think the construction facility has been around since at least 4000 BC. See sightings / paintings from the early eras of history. So he's talking about in a lot of even Renaissance paintings, you'll see stuff in the sky that look like UFOs. I mean, you see them in Egyptian carvings as well, but that's what he's referring to. Has any form of intelligible communication been established? Yes, it also depends on your viewpoint. They mostly want very little to do with us until we start to talk about war and nuclear options. It's one of the reasons why you see them so often at critical events. Now, that's true. In most of the nuclear tests, especially the earlier ones, we see objects in the sky over there where there shouldn't be. The one that comes to mind is the explosion at Bikini Atoll. That was the big one, right? That was the big one. Castle, I forget what the name of it was, but there were a couple of UFOs there. So that he's talking about, they don't care about us. They're not here to even, they don't care. They're not here to observe us. They don't care whether we live or die. They don't care. They think of us like animals in a zoo. They'll look, whatever, but it's not a thing to them. He believes, and he'll get to this eventually, that they're here for resources, specifically gold, and they only will intervene when they think that we're going to do something stupid, like set off a nuke, destroy the planet, but they need the resources. And what's interesting about the gold is if you go back to the stories about the Anunnaki, who were allegedly the first, right, the aliens that seeded humanity, or whatever you believe about Anunnaki and Enki and those quote unquote gods, and Zecharia Sitchin's book, those beings were here for gold. So that tracks. Now, maybe he knows that. You know, I'm not saying his story is true. I'm saying it's interesting. So there are a lot of nuggets about his story that track with Bob Lazar and Zecharia Sitchin's and a lot of the people and the stories that we're aware of. Now, that could just mean that he knows all the stories like we do, and he weaves this narrative. That's the skeptical point of view. And look, I probably lean that way. But if that's not so, then a lot of the things he has to say are very coincidental and line up with a lot of the theories that have existed for a long, long time. So he's saying at least 4000 BC, see sightings, see paintings, early history. Any communication, no, they don't care about us until we're going to destroy the planet. Do they know who or what is creating these craft? Yes, as mentioned earlier, the mobile construction unit is responsible for their deployment and construction. Any potential they are made by a higher branch of the government? Absolutely not. What allows them to fly so fast? What technology? Gravity manipulation and the materials they are constructed from. So he'll get into that a little bit later as well. But it tracks with a lot of what Lazar says. We think the construction unit is driven by AI. The response time to threats is almost instant and usually very calculated and well thought out. You all should pay attention to this. The majority of UFOs, as I mentioned previously, are built to spec and purpose. This is why they're always different sizes. The contents and equipment usually mimic the intended purpose too. Is it related to that one under rock, that one Scandinavian country, the one that deploys with tectonic plates? No, this one almost never leaves the Bermuda Triangle. BS, governments have and have had for a while advanced anti-gravity crafts. You asked if the particular UFOs we study are the result of a foreign government, not if other governments have shittier versions. Speed alone tells us what we're looking at. So he'll get into it later, but he says pretty much that we don't have the tech. You know, we have been able to reverse engineer some of their technology, but not anti-gravity, not for lack of trying. They just can't get it to work. So people ask him, like, these UAPs we're seeing, is that like a military test? He said, no way, we can't do anything like that. Do the UAPs return back to the manufacturing unit? Yes, some come in and leave the planet, but usually very rarely. Usually the same number that comes in goes out unless special circumstances arise. It feels more like a carrier, but with construction capability. Interesting. What are the purposes of the UAPs? Surveillance of humans? The U.S. believes they're not here to harm us. They only seem interested in us once they realize we're destroying things around us, including each other. One of the officials in charge said something that stuck with me. They act like keepers of a zoo, uninterested in the daily life of wildlife until there's a problem. Right? I mean, if they're that advanced, why care about us? I mean, that's maybe hard for us to accept, being the species that we are, that's so self-centered. But if you're a million years ahead in technology, we're ants. Why would you care? It's like, oh, I'll have an ant farm. That's cool. But that's not why I'm here. That's not interesting. Can I approach that facility without being attacked? The last unit we saw approach the facility didn't even have time to communicate they were being attacked before it was over. What's buried under the mesa on Skinwalker Ranch? Is that show even legitimate? It seems like some of the most legitimate research on anything paranormal I've ever seen in my life, and I'm very curious about what they seem to be finding. He says no idea of the project, if any, is likely kept separate. Asked about elements, doesn't have any idea about that. The crafts we recover are built with numerous elements. Some aren't even obtainable here. So he'll talk about later that that most of the craft are made with metals that are mined here, but there are some metals that are brought off-world to make the craft. Are they friends? They cut their losses when crashes are recovered. Same with personnel. Zookeepers aren't friends with the animals, right? So he'll get into this later as well. When there's a crash, why not communicate? Why not? He says to them, it's not worth it. They have so many things going on, and there's no reason to communicate. A vessel crashes, if they can get to it, they do. If humans are crawling on it, they just say, F it, nothing we can do about it. They don't bother. They don't bother with it. It's not worth recovering the technology. It's not worth having to deal with us. Do you know if the entities behind the UFOs are native to the Earth, like an older civilization, breakaway civilization, or a civilization of humans that escaped a previous cycle of cataclysm due to their advanced tech? That's a cool question. Limited expertise, since my role is more craft analysis. U.S. believes they are foreign to our world. A previous cataclysm could make sense. They also show up in times of strife, such as natural events. I also think that other guy who was talking about approaching the area without being attacked is a remote viewer. He talks about how he lurked on boards because he had never heard of remote viewing before. He wasn't aware that was a thing. But he says in the people he deals with, that psychic type of stuff doesn't come up. They're on the ground. They're scientists. They're practical. They're picking up pieces. They're not, projecting their consciousness. Have you tried sending in a raft of hippies? The AI might not recognize them as a threat. Just kidding. Based on previous disappearances and acts of hostility, we believe the construction facility carrier has learned what is and isn't hostile. Usually it would just move away or stay deep under the water. It doesn't fire on civilian boats, for example. Exceptions apply when we have seen one or two go missing, usually after sharp turns, etc. So you're on a princess cruise with your family or whatever, you're probably fine. I don't know where the cruise ships go. I bet they don't go in the Bermuda Triangle though. Let me check the chat if you know. Maybe they do, but it seems to me like if you talk to the suits that own the cruise lines in corporate, like, do you guys cruise in the Bermuda Triangle? They would say, we don't believe in that, but we still don't go there just in case. Jay Richards says, yeah, they do. All right. So I guess the platform is not worried about it. They're not worried about the cruise ships because they know who's an enemy and who isn't. But if a ship is cruising along and it makes a sharp turn toward the craft, it gets disappeared. Any relation to Antarctica? My section monitored just this craft and any interactions it attempted. A previous coworker did mention something in passing of Antarctica at one point, but I ignored it, if I'm being honest. Talking about other projects is considered career suicide. How about the destination of the space orbs? Is Jupiter a potential destination? I believe they are keeping a massive orb inside of the gas giant that have no evidence but many dreams of it. No idea. If it's a project, I haven't seen it. No orbs out of the construction facility, just UFOs. What units have been lost approaching this construction machine? Why have they not sent a Seawolf to investigate? The Jimmy Carter with its nanotech. Everything you can think of, really. At one point, nuclear missiles were being toyed with. Again, we deployed fighters and a sub with serious intent. Everything except the sub was lost. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about here, but there was an event that you guys probably know about where in nuclear facility, nuclear silos, suddenly they just started arming themselves. And nobody knew why. They just started arming up. And everyone's like, oh, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. And then something happened and nothing happened and everything settled down. But that was a scary situation. There have been some close calls and some false alarms. And this guy attributes some of those to the UFOs getting hinky with us. How would they come to the conclusion the UAP being released are ET if they don't know what the UAP are to begin with, or if there's nothing inside them? It's a pretty big jump to go right to ET. That's a good point. He says they crash sometimes. Parts fail, and gravity engines near the surface of the planet can be like crossing an intersection. We recover these and sometimes find passengers. We mostly see drones now. Back in the earlier days, we saw a lot more piloted craft. This is just a question that he moved on from the project. The last unit we saw approach the facility didn't even have time to communicate. Okay. Any details on what happened to that craft? Normal approach details. Pilot responsive and actively talking. The feed cuts out. Pilot still talking, suddenly nothing. Poor guy likely had no idea it was a suicide mission. Based on what we've seen, the construction facility has far superior weapons than the UFOs do. The weapon destroys the matter it hits entirely. It also craps on anything electronic in the vicinity. So Bermuda Triangle, right? They talk about compasses stop working, the radio, there's interference, magnetic interference. This could be what he's talking about. Like we just do like a giant EMP that lasts the whole time you're in here. So get out. The contents and equipment usually mimic the intended purpose. Like the equipment share a pattern specific to its purpose. Yes, usually when we find a thinner model, for example, it would have no pilot and have a lot of sensory hardware. My favorite is finding one that is fitted for research. If we're lucky, we find things we have never seen before. Before I left, we were looking at what we thought was a lab or some kind for genetics. A genetics lab. I don't know if he gets into what genetics he's talking about, but that's scary and interesting. Talking about one shaped like a pear burger. Size, shape, and speed are usually the factors we use to determine what the purpose of the UFO is. We get it wrong sometimes. They can be quite large, and both pear and burger shapes are known builds. So, common shapes. All right, I've had 2 orange orbs approach me to within 100 feet one night, glowing translucent, but rather dim like the setting sun seen through smog. They were flying in 45-degree formation like this, about 50 miles an hour. He says research/science vessels sometimes have mobile light-producing cameras used for multiple purposes, from scouting to keeping threats contained or at bay. These are shaped like hammers, and when operated are extremely bright. Red lights are a sign of hostility or caution to deploy weapons. Orange lights are usually for spotting minerals or living things. That's kind of what I was talking about before with the laser, the guy shining the laser. So he'll get into it later, but he's talking about red lights, orange lights, but later he'll say he's talking about lasers that they use. As soon as I blinked my flashlight at them, and they accelerated to several thousand knots and disappeared. He says, I'm not surprised. The range on those is quite large. The UFO was likely somewhere above you, quite high up. Is the underwater base near Catalina Island? He says, no. This one has only left the Atlantic Ocean twice, both times before I arrived. Are aliens human or humanoid? And he says humanoid, very humanoid. Then how do you know anything about abductions, forced breeding programs, etc.? He says, bodies are removed before we're allowed to perform work. We definitely see some passing by, hence changes in older proven methods by new management. He's talking about how there's a lot of turnover in his team because they're using different methods now than they used to. So they're using new personnel. Also, real true disclosure coming anytime soon. The Air Force is extremely frustrated with the lack of progress on their end. We felt similar, but are unable to share details with them. So the Air Force trying to reverse engineer, but just can't make any progress. All right, so so I'd assume this is sort of an AI design that seems to be advanced, yet already prepared for the get-go. Can you rephrase this? Basically, when designed to, let's say, be a miner, you usually see hardware dedicated to resource collection on the vessel. If the vessel is something scientific, you may encounter things like tools, and as previously mentioned, something akin to a lab. We thought of it more as I need to go hiking. So the construction facility builds you a car, UFO, and packs it full of hiking supplies, and even adjusts the shape to fit what was packed. That makes sense. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, see if anyone's confused. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, what's the mission? Okay, you're going to do that. You're going to do mining. Here's some scanning equipment, some mining equipment. It's this size. That's the shape. We just skin it and deploy it. Later, he'll talk about mining, how the Chinese have been able to successfully reverse engineer some of the alien mining tech, but it keeps breaking, and they don't know why. And it's probably because they don't have the right parts. And I bring it up that he's going to say it later because this is long, and people are going to bail out, and I don't blame you. So if there's something interesting, I want to get you the nugget before you split. He's asked, do you think there are fewer piloted crafts because the population of the facility, if anything, is declining? He replies, no, the common consensus is that they're just being careful. I've heard recovery of living pilots usually doesn't go well for either of us. We suspect they piloted a lot of initial craft due to early complications. We also saw more crashes. Any bodies recovered to show any ranges of aging we can recognize? I wonder if most of the inhabitants are either old or dead at this point, though younger bodies would disprove that, I suppose. So that's an interesting question. Like, are they here breeding on the platform? Or do they have extremely long lifespans and they've been here for a long, long time? He says, no idea about age, not my specialty, and asking about it would have been a net negative, especially now. Previous higher-ups were getting better about being open with information since discovery happened quicker. But, I'd like to know that answer, and I don't remember if he answers it later. Are they breeding here? He does talk about how they are male and female and so forth, so maybe they are. What do the passengers look like? Are they biological and or android? He says they're biological. Do you know anything about people such as Stephen Greer, Elizondo, or whatever? Are these people in the know or LARPers or controlled misinformation? No idea. One name sticks out you didn't mention. Mentioning Bob Lazar by name would likely have you taken out back and put down like a dog. Do the math on why. That's very interesting. So he doesn't know who Elizondo is. And Elizondo was the director of ATIP. So that's an offshoot of Project Blue Book. That's right next to the Air Force. He doesn't know who Elizondo is. So that's either the guy's not telling the truth and hasn't done enough homework, because you should know who it is, or Elizondo is just part of disinformation, and this guy's working for the real thing. So he's busy. I'm recovering aircraft. I'm not following the disinformation campaign. But interesting about Bob Lazar, that you can't talk about him. And of everything ever found regarding UFOs in general, what is your personal favorite? So he says, new engine was deployed with a very large model that I had never seen before. We usually see 3 to 5 gravity-producing engines, and this one had 7. Favorite object or find? Probably the lab, since we never fully understood how it worked before it was destroyed. Makes me wonder whether a meaningful distinction between scientific study and amusement still exists for them, if it ever did. He says, this was before my time, but they talked about a bus UFO that had more occupants than hardware. Most of the intended purpose appeared to be for physical viewing. I wondered if they ever just wanted to look at the animals. So, I pictured the same thing, a big UFO with windows on it, just cruising around, just looking at the intelligent monkeys. So he's asked, how long till we can hang with aliens? Here's his answer, as harsh as it is. Have any retarded cousins that destroy everything they touch? When do you want to see them again? Right? So yeah, they don't want to have anything to do with us. Retarded cousins. So they're far ahead of us with technology, and we're aggressive. So why? Someone's talking about a strangely recurrent thing, at a minimum, the psychotronic devices of some sort. So he says, this reminded me of something in my first year. UFO crashes, they remove the bodies well before my team arrives. We start to look, and the craft is unpowered at first. A few minutes later, the craft powers on and starts to close up. We radio out and get a response from the unit removing one of the occupants, alien, that they are working on it. Ship powers off, and the other team asks if we are good to go. No mention of how access was possible. I suspect the pilot may have interfaced with the ship by remote or psionic ability. So I don't know if it's this event or a different one he talks about later, but he's talking about a scary time where he was in a craft, just whatever he's doing, like he finds tools and stuff. So he's gathering stuff, and the thing closes, and he's stuck in there, and he can't call for help. He can't radio out. He's just in there hoping that, I hope this opens. All right. Someone is asking him about, are they translucent? They definitely had an inner core that wasn't see-through. Lots of tools they use produce light. If this is still about the orb, the shell you may have seen was just the light around the device I called the hammer. He mentions the hammer a lot as the shape, and I can't really picture it. Because I don't know of any, as that being a common shape. I don't know of any UFO that's been shaped like a hammer. So I'm wondering if he means something else. He's asked, are there more than one construction facility? You mentioned one in the Bermuda Triangle. However, there are a lot of UFOs off the west coast of the Americas as well. Any insight? He says, I suspect there may be, since we only watch the Atlantic Ocean and the UFOs we track normally don't stray far from home base, but asking about it would have been a bad move. So he doesn't know, but it could be that these platforms are elsewhere, possibly lots of places that we don't really know. And, if his team is working on the platform in the Atlantic and there's a team working on a platform in the Pacific, they're not going to know that each other exists, most likely. Maybe supervisory would, but techs, I don't think they would be rated on other projects. I think this is the only thing that we're worried about. Because what if there are platforms all over the planet? What if there's 50? What if there's 100 of them? You get to a point where instead of focusing on your work, you start wondering, like, what the hell is going on with all the, where are we invaded? Are we infested? Are we overrun? Well, he kind of says here, are there more than one? Asking about it would be a bad move. He worked in the Atlantic. He doesn't know of the others. The mention of something in the Arctic was weird and brief when it came up. Talk about hybridization of the human race. If you only knew how bad things are. He gets a little vulgar there, but basically says that they're not looking necessarily to interbreed with us because it'd be like interbreeding with an inferior genetics. I read somewhere some UFO navigation systems require an extraterrestrial whose own personal wavelength has been specifically attuned to the neural network of the craft. So he says that tracks somewhat for me. When we look at the craft, we usually have to force certain things to work. Two teams come behind mine, so that could be dedicated to understanding of the craft. So he mentions it here and there that there could be some kind of psychic interface. If you remember the episode on the ARVs, the alien reproduction vehicle, and the Mark McCandlish story, where his friends saw the UFO, and they basically created blueprints of it. The controls were very simple, just kind of it was just a stick and sort of and like almost like a trackball to control the ship. Everything else they thought was done with a psychic interface, which doesn't have to be that crazy, right? That doesn't have to be a wacky psychic interface. That could be Neuralink, right? Well, I mean, that's not that far off. If a monkey can use Neuralink to play Pong, then in a million years, aliens can use Neuralink to control a craft. All right, someone asked, can you tell us what they look like physically? Usual gray type or big ears? And he says, imagine the typical grays you see on TV. I've seen 2 corpses, so maybe they're a different species, but I've never laid eyes on another. He's asked about culture, and he's heard rumors mostly. They almost never want anything to do with us. Mentions of destruction or warfare apparently change their attitude pretty quickly. I hope they're watching what's going on in Ukraine, right? Just keep an eye on that. All right, hell of a claim. Any particular incident? I'm assuming you're referring to the various nuclear site incursions. So he's talking about when they get involved with us. Let's see what he says. I guess global conflict wasn't a good term. I meant more of tension. The nuclear site incursions, the airspace violations has also been increasing tensions. From what I understand, the Roswell incident increased tension between the US and Soviets. It did. There's security tensions behind other countries gaining access to information or materials surrounding the phenomenon. There's been great domestic tension within the US. True. Intel agencies, military disinformation campaigns, etc. Disinformation is interesting. If he's military contractor, or PSYOP, he would say disinformation. He wouldn't say misinformation. A civilian will say that, because that's a new made-up word. Disinformation is what PSYOPs do. Since why did the UFOs screw up those people in Brazil? Was it by accident? Them not knowing we'd be damaged equipment. If found, they usually monitor us. If approached at an uncomfortable distance, they flee. When cornered, it doesn't end well. I think he's talking about the Virginia incident. Their tools can do harm to us, even for just scientific purposes. We think they just don't care. All right, so he covers this a little bit later, and I'm jumping around, but this thing jumps around. I just want to get you the nuggets. Someone asks him, about abductions. People are abducted, and they're experimented on with these devices, scientific equipment. Cartman gets the probe up his butt, whatever it is. And they asked him, people talk about how painful those things are. And he says, they just don't care. They don't care that they hurt us. They're doing their experiment. And if it if it destroys someone's mind, so be it. If it hurts their body, so be it. They don't care. We're just meat. Do you believe we're under their control in some way or sometime in history? He's asked. Possibly, but I have no way of knowing. The higher ups I worked for seemed hell bent on discovering more about them. Usually not a quality found among controlled beings. And that's a good point. Right? If they're in charge, why are we trying to learn so much? What were the main reasons for the crashes? I think random lightning or freak accident, seeing how advanced they are. That's a good question. You'd be surprised how many mistakes they make, especially the further back you look. One area they seem to avoid, like the plague, we suspect is due to issues with gravity and flight. Before they figured it out, we collected quite a few mishaps there. They've tried to shoot some down, mostly over nuclear incidents, but failed miserably. All right, he covers it a little bit later, and I think I have some more insight that he doesn't get to. It's a good question. Why, if your technology is so advanced, why can't you keep your ship in the air? Flying is supposed to be the safest way to travel. Why are you crashing? If you can fly across the galaxy, you can't fly to New Mexico. But he's saying that they were kind of still figuring things out, and they were hitting pockets around the planet where gravity was weird and electromagnetism was weird. And he talks about there's a place they avoid, like the plague, we suspect is due to issues with gravity and flight. And later he says that it's somewhere in Mexico. He doesn't know anything about it. But there is an area in Mexico called the Zone of Silence. And in the Zone of Silence, it's a weird place where nothing works. Phones don't work. Radios don't work. It's just a very weird spot. Now, it could be a coincidence. I could just be connecting those dots. But he says it's a place where things don't work in Mexico, but that's all he knows about it, and he moves on. But that seems to make sense to me. Maybe there's some type of gravitational anomaly there that their craft won't work. Did you see written symbols on the craft? Yes, usually marked by doorways and key objects. Written language appears frequently on tools and critical items. Also reads like their objective is to observe and preserve. And he says, I agree. The idea was pitched that they're waiting for us to mature or perhaps something bigger to arrive, and they don't want us to ruin the planet in the meantime. So they're just keeping an eye on things until the big ship gets here, I guess. What do you believe is the reason for the uptick in sightings? Once again, my knowledge was cut off about 2 years ago. If you mean very recently, my guess would be the Russians and US having a little secret dance amongst themselves, which they are. When nuclear anything gets involved, we see large deployments for long periods of time. Strife seems to be the catalyst. He's asked, what's your scariest experience while engaging with the phenomenon? What was your favorite? He says, doors and closing on us, as mentioned above, made me wish I had brown pants. Still fascinated with the lab we found. It was damaged by accident, and I never really got much time with it. He's asked, are you aware of any foreign tech that was successfully reverse engineered? He says, yes, we used to laugh at Russian and Chinese designs. We stopped laughing at China when they produced an operational but buggy version of their mining equipment. Still stumps most of our engineers. China also lies out of its ass, but from what we saw, we deemed it operational and working. Countries listed above have flight-capable craft, just not very good ones. I'm honestly surprised nobody's asked about the energy source or internals. And then he's heading out for the night. So this went on for multiple days. He gets to it later about the device with China. And what it is, I don't, maybe he'll tell us how big it is, but it's some type of laser or energy that is blasted into the rock, but it's tuned for whatever they're trying to mine. So just a wall of rock, right? But we tune it for gold, and it just eliminates anything but gold. And so all that's left is just gold. Just vaporizes or whatever it does, just dematerializes the non-metal that's not tuned for. So if they want aluminum, they tune for aluminum. Everything else is just eliminated or separated out. So apparently China has that tech, but it's buggy, and they can only get it to work for very short spurts. So it's not like they're using it on an industrial basis. They're trying to figure it out. I don't know what the question is here. One example was shortly after I joined, they said one was downed, but 2 occupants were alive. The first team couldn't get close without being attacked. Aliens never seem to recover their lost UFOs for whatever reason, so they just waited out a few days until they died, then recovered the UFO. Hostility is usually their last option. What's the energy source? You mentioned Bob, so I think I know already. And if you know Lazar's story, then you would have guessed correct as well. Correct-ish. The power source is element 115. The thing no one talks about is that usually they seal it within the craft because it produces its own gravity field. Bob Lazar handled E115, which was already pulled out, which is rare and weird. Protocol now is that only one person is allowed to handle E115. I was forbidden from touching or interacting with it. We still had trouble producing it too. So you know that we're producing it, but it's unstable. So if he says we're having trouble producing it, I don't know if he's talking about civilians or not. But if so, he's right. We can't get it to be stable. I'm just looking at the chat. Element 115, that's right, 115. Atlantis IRL, is this the whistleblower stuff? This is not David Grush, unless it happens to be the same guy, but I doubt it. There are some things about this account that bother me from a veracity standpoint. You know, for him dropping in things like LOL. You know, a military contractor, especially who works like a scientific detachment, I just don't think would talk like that. But you know, maybe I'm wrong, because he's about 30 years old, and he says everyone he works with is 35 or younger, so all people. So maybe millennials just drop casual LOLs in there. I don't know, but you know, his writing is very, very casual. JG says, yeah, that guy just feels like a fraud. Aaron Skinner, I can't believe you're falling for a 4chan troll who would use our word. I'm not falling for anything, Aaron, and I said this earlier. I'm saying that I lean toward this is not true, but it makes for an interesting read. You know, I think it's a good narrative. You know, so we don't have to believe everything to enjoy it. I mean, that's why the Y-Files exists, right? I mean, if I'm debunking most of the stories, I still like the stories. And judging by the live stream numbers, you enjoy it too. Bob Lazar called it unpentium. Big Bad Airwolf, I would believe this if it wasn't on 4chan. Yeah, I do too. I wish it wasn't on there. And that's, you know, and that's part of him being very young, because if you're older than 35, which is not that old, but if you're just older than 35, you wouldn't even think to go on 4chan to blow your whistle on stuff. You would maybe go Reddit. And then if you're over 45, you know, what are you going to call the papers? But 4chan, you would do that if you're young. But I just think it's entertaining. And a lot of his stuff tracks with a lot of other things that we know about UFOs. Joseph Smith says it's true. It's all true. Scott R., I believe it more on 4chan than I would on Reddit, which is an interesting point. A lot of all those crazy conspiracies on 4chan turned out to be true, didn't they? How do UFOs travel? In the context of those Tic Tac reports and Bob Lazar's report / video, where they seemingly jump through space-time and light to appear in a new location. Notice how it just phases to a new location like staggers. He says this is common when moving at high speed from a standstill or a slow speed initially. Gravity distorts time, and the object inside the field can stagger when traveling. It's an interesting answer, especially for a 4chan guy. And, you know, dovetailing with Cozy Reb's theory tonight on time being an energy field that works with the ether. If you're using gravity to distort that energy field of time and then moving a physical object through it, it would make sense that it's going to look weird to us, because when we see something, we're seeing electromagnetic spectrum of visible light moving at light speed come into our eyeballs. But if you have this time is everywhere infinite, like Kozyrev said, and this ether, which doesn't care about time, everything happens instantly, things are going to happen in that realm that we can't really comprehend, but our eyes can only see visible light, which is too slow for the ether. It's too slow. So if an object is moving through the ether, it's going to look staggered. Shout out to the Picard maneuver. You oldies into TNG know what I'm talking about. Picard maneuver, who's got it? Let me see. Who knows Picard maneuver? Matt, was someone really offended by the word retard? Hey, man, I didn't say it. But look, I'm Gen X. We grew up using that word. We don't mean no harm. We don't mean no harm by it. And look, if you're in here and you're offended by it, you're probably watching the wrong show. I've heard the craft can detect the presence of a camera and when someone is filming them. So he says, not unless the craft is put into a mode to detect a lens. If the UFO is standing still or hovering, though, they won't miss you. You can see a face like you're standing in front of someone a couple of miles out. Doesn't look like a camera, though their eyes are different. He's just saying they way up in the air, they can see whatever they want to see. How are you able to talk about any of this? Didn't you swear to secrecy? He said, yes, liver cancer sucks. Wouldn't the government already have their eye on you, considering you could turn out to be a loose end? He says, I'm not going on national TV or radio. I'm on a 4chan board. I'm sure they look at stuff like this, but cancer makes you feel a little different. Also, did you or your coworkers experience strange things outside of work that could be related to what you saw? No, usually most people working there had no prior interest in UFOs, or at least feigned interest or feigned not having interest. So someone says, hey, most zookeepers love their work and love the animals a great deal. And he says, I've wondered if some of them do like us. They definitely have the ability to destroy us. The spheres are a type of unmanned surveillance drone. Shaped like a hammer, but when activated, yes, they appear like spheres due to the intense light. They see light differently, and looking into the sun for them isn't an issue like it is for us. I can't speak for psionic abilities, if any, since I've only heard rumors in passing. We believe the lack of communication was inherent to the personal beliefs about us. As mentioned previously, but active, serious discussion about destruction gets them going. So they don't care so much until we start talking about destroying the planet. Do you think they're playing some role in stopping rogue entities and dangers from space hurting us on a large scale? That's scary. He says that was another theory, yes. We think they are more interested in keeping the planet safe from us. Two main suggestions are that we don't spoil the planet before they arrive and take it from us. Don't spoil the planet before they arrive and take it from us, or they are letting us evolve and grow while preventing devastation. Let's hope it's the second one. Not just, we're keeping the seat warm for you till the mothership gets here, and then we're just all enslaved. It's a cookbook. Here he's just talking about remote viewing that he doesn't know much about. Someone asked him about interdimensional stuff. He says, as for the interdimensional aspect of it, I don't believe there's anything actually interdimensionally happening. It's just our best way to try and perceive what's going on behind the veil. From what I understand, whatever is behind the phenomenon has the ability to manipulate matter, energy, in similar ways that we can manipulate information. We can create 3D realities and manipulate them via our understanding of machine code and linear algebra. So they could do the same with matter and energy. It also seems to be able to play around with space-time, almost as if we're sitting on or perceiving time that's been homogeneously transformed into projective space, while they're free to move about homogeneous space. If they haven't entered the projection space, then they could freely move about our space without interacting with it until they collapse their space coordinates into our projective space, normalizing their position with their homogeneous coordinate. All right, so he's just talking about they're in their space, their coordinated space, and we're living in a projection type of space compared to them that they could pop in and out of. He's not saying that that's true. He's just saying that that's a theory. Why does image analysis by someone competent on the original UFO always show weird stuff? Gravity and the reflective nature of the craft, usually. Am I right in assuming that disco lights is just air absorbing radiation or being completely saturated by it? No. So no. He may talk about this later, and it's a good point, is that if you see a photo of a UFO, the edges are always a little blurry, and that's how you know it's a real thing. If it's a sharp edge, it's not real, just because the way they move and the way gravity is. What materials are these UFOs made of? That answer gets complicated quickly. Short answer is an alloy that we cannot reproduce, but only repurpose. This alloy is kind of like a film that fits over the frame of the craft. I mentioned they were built to spec. That's exactly what I mean. The shape is always efficiently designed. The actual frame itself is heavier and composed of more elements. Both of these alloys have a lot of elements we cannot reproduce. One of the main problems when repurposing these alloys is getting them hot enough. They absorb heat very well, and shaping the metal is a tedious process. We can't melt it. Can you quickly walk through the process of identifying the contents of a crashed UFO craft? First team leaves that details. All right, first team leaves that deals with occupants and initial discovery. Then we arrive and meet with an external member of the team who can touch and examine parts we are not allowed to interact with. We've never had to cut our way into the UFO. We enter the first order. See, he doesn't use punctuation, so it hurts the credibility. It's still a fun story. We enter. The first order of business is checking for E-115, then leaving the ship together and send it away. We return and look for any tools and loose objects that can be extracted. We then start to strip any specialized components on board, such as sensory equipment or navigation. We leave, and a third and fourth team arrive, likely to remove the bulk of the craft. Tell me about the mobile construction facility making them. It's shaped like an extremely large UFO, but as one mentioned, more of a burger design. Almost never leaves the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, it will sit through hurricanes and only move elsewhere to release or receive a UFO. No visible weapons or cockpit from satellite footage. It also does not use any lights, unlike other UFOs. Are there no other things making UFOs? That's the question. Yes, UFOs arrive and depart Earth, but very infrequently. These UFOs are usually quite large. The U.S. has been itching to get its hands on a freighter UFO when inbound or outbound, but the chance has never presented itself. Leadership openly stated securing one would result in promotion. How do you secure that? How do you secure a freighter-sized, an imperial destroyer? How do you snatch that inbound? This makes a lot of sense. But what about the saucers, multicolored lights? I highly doubt the drones are military, except the triangle kind. This was important because he says he's never seen a triangle UFO. Lights are usually on bigger vessels and are sensory in nature. They are also used to spot each other. So the triangles, he's saying that's not what he works on. Now, could be a different team that he's not aware of, or it could be the triangle experimental aircraft that we're not supposed to know about. But one of those triangles was just photographed in Vegas just about a week or two ago. It was pretty compelling. All right, are we taking a small break to do a giveaway or what?
Yes, please.
You'd like to?
Yes.
I hope you're not too bored by the UFO discussion.
Well, the count grew 2,000.
I got a weird commentary on it that I'd like to put out there.
What do you got?
It seems like that technology is thousands and thousands of years ahead of us, right?
Yep.
So they said that the reason we were finding bodies was because back in the day, they had to pilot them more. So how come if they're thousands of years ahead, they're only working in like the 50 years of progress like we are as humans? Like in 50 or in 100 years, we went from piloted vehicles to drones. So it took us 100 years to get there. If they're thousands of years ahead, how come they weren't at drones 100 years ago? One of my questions with that. But I also put into the private chat there a link to the lights over Las Vegas the night that the kids saw the aliens, which I believe is what you were just talking about with the triangle sighting over Vegas.
All right, let me call her up here. Hold on, I got to verify. I got to pick the motorcycles. I got to turn the elephant the right way. Complete the puzzle. All right, before the landing. So this is Vegas?
Yeah.
Looks like a Vegas backyard.
Yep, that's it.
It looks like,
At first glance, I thought they could be the flares, but they ain't flares.
Flares eventually have to fall.
Flares fall eventually.
Hovering over the strip, though.
Danny Stormborn says, "Thank you, Gino. Pulling up good show prep on the fly. That's always helpful."
That was submitted to me by Space Goat.
Space Goat?
Yep.
Submitted that? So this is a long time to capture this, but I don't see any structure between those lights.
But I don't know because it was.
They're staying in the exact same formation without moving if there's no structure.
I feel like I see something that they're on.
You do?
Yeah, don't you? I mean, it seems like it's a little different, and it's like a.
It was also super like cloudy in Vegas. I don't know how long ago this was.
JVC Paints thinks this is the TR3, and that could be. I mean,
What's that?
here's a helicopter. No, I don't know how far they are from each other.
Oh, true.
What that is.
Now, by the way, that 4chan story, I never saw it on 4chan, but I have heard a lot of those very similar things throughout different stories told on the internet. That especially that these UAPs, every one of them is being built underwater at the time of that it's needed. They're made on demand, kind of like our t-shirts.
Speaking of t-shirts, you can get a Fear the Crab Cat t-shirt and all kinds of other t-shirts at shop.thewifiles.com. It's a great way to support the channel. Keep it going. Every week is a new t-shirt. There's the